That morning began like any other. No alarms, no extreme weather, no warning signs of any kind. Someone walked into their shift with a cup of coffee still warm in their hand. Someone else was in the middle of an unfinished conversation with a coworker. Everything felt too familiar to raise any concern. And then, just a few hours later, they left the workplace in a body bag. The frightening part isn't that this happened. It's that the people in this line of work have known about the risk for a long time. They knew it could happen. They knew it had happened before, and they knew it was still happening. Most of the people in this video did not die on the most dangerous day of their lives. They died on a day that was completely ordinary. So if the risk was already known, what keeps these deaths repeating again and again? In this video, we'll follow real stories to uncover an answer that many people would rather not face. If you're interested in the real stories behind disasters the world has forgotten, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss. What comes next? A familiar job. A death called occupational risk. In the early morning, on quiet streets, there is a sight most people barely notice. Workers standing on rooftops, bent over layers of shingles, laboring under the sun or the wind. It's a scene so ordinary that few feel the need to stop and look twice. But behind that familiar image lies a reality most people never consider. Roofing is one of the most dangerous professions in the United States. Its fatality rate is higher than many jobs commonly labeled as dangerous, higher than police officers, higher than firefighters. The danger does not come from a single cause. The work takes place at height, surfaces are unstable and slippery. Weather conditions shift without warning. Heavy equipment is used in confined spaces. A single small misstep can lead to immediate consequences. In the construction industry, more than 1/3 of all fatal falls involve roofers. Yet for many in the trade, this risk has become familiar. Part of the job, something that is accepted. On the morning of October 15, 2004, in Torrington, Connecticut, Robert, 21 years old, woke up like he did every other day. He said goodbye to his wife, to his young daughter, and went to work. That day, Robert's crew was repairing the Warner Theater. On the ground beside the building sat a tar kettle about 1 meter deep. Inside were roughly 300 gallons of molten roofing tar, heated to nearly 260 degrees Celsius. The tar was pumped from the kettle up to the roof through a pipe, where it was spread as part of the job. Everything was proceeding according to routine. There were no unusual warnings, no signs that this day would be any different. On the roof, Robert was pushing a bucket. A brief loss of balance. He slipped, fell from the roof, and dropped straight into the vat of boiling tar below. 2 coworkers rushed to pull him out. One of them was Robert's father-in-law. Both men suffered severe burns. One had to be airlifted to a burn center. For Robert, it was over almost instantly. Behind the theater, the rest of the crew stood in shock. Some cried openly, some were unable to speak. One man leaned against a wall, covering his face with a trembling arm. Investigators from OSHA arrived at the scene shortly afterward. They documented 8 safety violations related to the project. Among them was the failure to provide fall arrest systems for workers on the roof. The same violation this company had been cited for years earlier on another job. An autopsy later confirmed the cause of death: asphyxiation due to submersion combined with severe thermal injury. A death that happened quickly, and according to the record, one that was entirely preventable. In the roofing industry, the cost of safety equipment can determine whether a project turns a profit. And when companies compete on price, safety is often the first thing to be cut. In this line of work, a single safety harness can decide whether a job makes money or not. And that is why deaths like this are not considered unexpected. If all of these risks have been known for so long, why do the same decisions continue to be made? Modern technology, when safety is not designed for people. After hearing about familiar lines of work, a common assumption often forms that danger exists only in old, manual, physically demanding jobs. That as technology advances, risk is brought under control. On October 29, 2013, at a wind farm in the southwest of the Netherlands, 4 technicians were carrying out routine maintenance. It was a task they had performed many times before. The turbine they were working on stood nearly 70 meters tall. At the top of the tower sat the nacelle, a sealed compartment housing the generator, hydraulic systems, and control equipment. The space inside was tight, filled with cables, packed with electrical components, and loaded with flammable materials. Among the 4 workers that day were Dan, 19 years old, and Arjun, 21. Both were young, part of a new generation of technicians, trained to work with energy systems widely regarded as modern and safe. The shift began as expected. No technical alerts, no recorded signs of instability. Then smoke appeared. At first thin, then thicker. Moments later, flames broke out near the generator. The exact cause was never conclusively determined, though investigators later believed an electrical short was the most likely trigger. Inside the nacelle, the enclosed space allowed the fire to spread rapidly. Temperatures rose. Smoke thickened. Access to the ladder was cut off. 2 technicians reacted almost immediately. They forced their way through the flames to reach the descent. It was an extremely dangerous decision, but it was the only option left to them. They reached the ground, disoriented, but alive. Dan and Arjun did not have that option. Their position meant every possible exit was blocked. They were trapped inside the burning nacelle, nearly 70 meters above the ground, the height of a 20-story building. From below, a photograph was taken. 2 figures stood amid smoke and fire at the top of the turbine. They stood close together. That moment would later become known as the last Who Got That Point. Only 2 choices remained: jump from 70 meters, or stay and wait as smoke and fire closed in. Neither choice led to survival. Fire crews arrived quickly. But there was no equipment capable of reaching that height while the turbine burned. The fire continued unchecked for hours. No one could access the nacelle while the flames remained active. Once the fire was finally extinguished, the body of one technician was found inside the charred nacelle. The other had already fallen into the field below. The exact cause of the fire was never definitively concluded. In the wind energy industry, many turbines are not equipped with fully automated fire suppression systems. The reason is not technological limitation. It is design. Every additional kilogram reduces efficiency. And in many cases, the accepted solution is to let the fire burn until there is nothing left to burn. These machines are designed not to fall, but they are not designed to save the people inside. If even jobs built around modern technology accept this level of risk, then where is anyone truly safe? The silent killer in agriculture, grain entrapment. After rare disasters that capture headlines, there is another kind of death, less visible, quieter, but far more frequent. At an agricultural facility near Mount Carroll, Illinois, Wyatt, 14 years old, had been on the job for just 2 weeks. It was his first summer job. Wyatt didn't like the grain bins. He told people that, not because the work was hard, but because he was afraid. He couldn't explain why, only that something felt wrong every time he stepped inside. That morning was hot. The air inside the grain bin was heavy and suffocating. Wyatt was working alongside Alex, 19, and Will, 20. The 3 climbed into a grain bin 4 stories tall. It held roughly 500,000 bushels of corn. Inside was a massive pile of grain that appeared solid at first glance. Their task was known as walking down the grain, using shovels and picks to push corn toward the discharge opening at the center, allowing it to flow downward more freely. It was a routine procedure, considered normal at small facilities. At around 9:45 a.m., the grain began to move. There was no explosion, no warning. Only the surface beneath Wyatt's feet starting to slide away. Within seconds, he was pulled under. Alex and Will turned back. They tried to grab Wyatt, but the grain was moving faster than they expected. Wyatt vanished beneath the surface. Alex and Will kept digging. Then Alex began to sink as well. The grain reached his waist, then his chest, then his neck. Will could still move his arms. He tried to clear grain from Alex's mouth, tried to keep him breathing as the flow slowed after the conveyor was shut down. Then Alex disappeared too. Rescue crews arrived shortly afterward. They managed to secure Will with a rope and pull him out just moments before he was completely engulfed. Wyatt and Alex were not as fortunate. Their bodies were recovered later that night, buried deep within the grain. Both had died of suffocation. The investigation that followed found that none of the workers had received training in grain bin safety. Wyatt, at 14, was not legally permitted to work in that environment under federal labor laws, yet he was there. And he had been assigned that task. The company was fined heavily, but the decisions that led to that morning were not unusual ones. They were familiar choices, made every day. No fire, no height, just grain in a matter of seconds. How can something that seems so harmless kill so quickly? The science of no escape. To understand why people like Wyatt never had a second chance, we have to look directly at how grain behaves once it starts to move. In agriculture, there are two distinct terms: grain entrapment, becoming trapped in grain, and grain engulfment, being completely swallowed by it. Entrapment often begins when one foot sinks, then a knee. At that stage, many people still believe they can pull themselves free. But once grain reaches the waist, self-rescue becomes nearly impossible. Engulfment happens much faster. When grain is flowing, a person can be pulled from a standing position to completely beneath the surface in less than 20 seconds. Grain does not behave like a solid, nor does it behave like a liquid. When it moves, it behaves like quicksand. Once the flow begins, anything resting on the surface is dragged downward with it. When grain reaches the knees, escape may still be possible with assistance. At the waist, the force required to pull someone out already reaches 400 to 600 pounds. If they are buried deeper, that force rises to 900 pounds or more. And even when the flow stops, the danger does not end. The surrounding grain compresses the chest. The lungs cannot expand. Each breath becomes harder than the last. Many victims are unable to scream, not because of panic, but because there is no longer enough space in the chest to push air outward. Even if the head remains above the surface, death can still occur, simply from the inability to inhale. Under ideal conditions, a grain entrapment rescue takes an average of 30 to 90 minutes, but brain damage from lack of oxygen begins after just 4 to 6 minutes, which means that in many cases, by the time rescue crews arrive, the outcome has already been decided. The space inside a grain bin makes everything worse: confined, enclosed, poorly ventilated. Spoiled grain also releases toxic gases, but carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide. At high concentrations, they can render a person unconscious before they are fully buried. For that reason, among rescue professionals, grain bins have another name: vertical coffins. And once the lid closes behind someone, time is no longer on their side. Not an accident, but a system. Over more than half a century, deaths like these have never disappeared. Since 1964, more than 1,200 grain entrapment cases have been officially recorded. The real number is believed to be significantly higher. Across decades, the fatality rate in these incidents has consistently remained above 50%. Most occur on small farms, where oversight is limited, where safety procedures exist more on paper than in daily practice. Those most at risk are found at both ends of the age spectrum, children and older workers. During that same period, machines have grown larger, systems have become faster, productivity has increased, but the level of protection afforded to human beings has not kept pace. These deaths do not happen in secrecy. They are counted, studied, analyzed in reports, conferences, and technical papers, and in some places, procedures have been revised, regulations tightened, rescue equipment improved, training programs expanded, but in many others, operations continue unchanged, the same decisions, the same assumptions, and the same risks accepted as part of the job. These deaths do not occur because of a lack of knowledge. They occur because that knowledge is not valued enough to force the system to change. And looking ahead, the question is no longer about what has already happened. It is this: in a world where efficiency is increasingly prioritized, where do human beings stand within the system? If you're interested in real stories about overlooked disasters and failed systems, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the cable channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.